It started with a horn, not just any horn, one of those obnoxiously loud, attention-seeking parade-style honks that rattles your bones and makes birds flee from trees. I opened my front door in my slippers and saw it, a full-blown white stretch wedding limo sitting in my driveway like it had been invited. There were rose petals on the hood, the windows were tinted like a celebrity's, and a dude in a tux was leaning against my garage like he paid rent. I blinked twice, stepped outside, and said the only words my brain could produce. What in the actual circus is this? Now, for context. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac. Peaceful, predictable, boring in the good way. My house is at the end, surrounded by pine trees and blessed with a long private driveway that I specifically bought so no one would ever bother me. I park my boat there. That boat is my pride and joy, gleaming white with navy blue trim and a name stenciled on the side. Last resort. Ironic in hindsight. So imagine my surprise stepping out and finding a limo parked dead center in my driveway, completely blocking access to my garage, front steps, and of course my boat. There was no note, no knock, no request, just an engine idling and some guy flipping through his phone like he was waiting for room service. I cleared my throat. He didn't look up. I raised my voice and asked him if he realized this was private property. He looked at me, smirked, and said, "Oh, we were told it was okay. It's just for the ceremony. Should be done in a few hours." Before I could respond, I heard the click-clack of heels on pavement and turned to see her. Karen. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer that screamed, "I control your mailbox," with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a smug smile that stretched wider than her fake eyelashes. "Don't be dramatic," she said, waving her hand like I was just another complaint she planned to ignore. "It's my daughter's big day. Surely you can sacrifice your ugly boat space for a few hours of joy." Now, I've had run-ins with Karen before. She once left a passive-aggressive letter on my windshield because my grass was too tall by 1.25 inches. She tried to fine me for having a flagpole in my yard that wasn't in the HOA-approved shade of beige. So believe me when I say this was not an innocent misunderstanding. This was Karen's masterpiece of entitlement. She planned this. She knew I'd be home, and she assumed I'd roll over and let her take over my driveway like she owned the deed. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Karen," I said, "you didn't ask. You didn't even inform me. You just dumped a limo in my driveway like I'm running a wedding venue." She crossed her arms, clearly already annoyed with me for not smiling through her invasion. "It's just for a little while. The limo needs to be close so the bride can make a grand entrance. And you never use this space anyway. That ridiculous boat takes up half of it. You should be grateful we made use of the rest." "Grateful." She said grateful. I turned toward the limo. The driver, now watching with mild amusement, shrugged like this was above his pay grade. "So you're not moving it?" I asked, giving them both one last chance to act like rational adults. Karen smiled, eyes twinkling with self-righteous fury. "No, and if you try anything, I'll have the HOA fine you for harassment. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a wedding to coordinate." She turned and walked off, heels stabbing into the pavement like punctuation marks. I stood there for a long minute, staring at the limo, then at my boat, then back at the limo. And that's when the idea hit me. A wicked, wonderful, beautifully petty idea. If they wanted to play games on my property, I was going to make sure they got the full experience of what happens when you mess with the wrong homeowner. I walked into the garage and opened the big steel door. Sunlight poured in and lit up Last Resort like a holy spotlight. She was already on her trailer, parked and ready. I backed my truck up, hitched the trailer in record time, and pulled out. Slow, steady, methodical, like a scene from a movie right before the villain drops the final line. As I drove around the block, I could see the wedding setup taking shape on the community lawn down the street. White chairs, a flower arch, people in uncomfortable shoes pretending they liked each other. Karen was at the center, barking orders, waving her arms, totally unaware of the showdown heading her way. When I returned, the limo was still in place. The tuxedo guy had now moved to sit on the hood. Perfect. I reversed my truck and boat into position directly behind the limo. I parked with mathematical precision, nose to nose with the Limo's trunk, trailer bumpers just inches from their bumper. There was zero chance of escape. The Limo was now stuck between my house and a 25-foot watercraft named Last Resort. I stepped out of my truck, walked up to the porch, grabbed a folding chair, and sat there like a sentry. The Limo driver got out, confused. He circled the car, looked at the boat, looked at me. "Hey, is that staying there?" I smiled. "Absolutely." From a distance, I heard Karen scream. Not just a yell, a full-blooded, throat-clinging screech of rage that echoed across the neighborhood and startled a squirrel into falling out of a tree. And that was when I knew I'd struck gold. The wedding wasn't even an hour away. The Limo wasn't going anywhere. And Karen? She had no idea what kind of storm was brewing, but she was about to find out. Karen came stumping down the sidewalk like a bridezilla's mother possessed, her heels clacking faster than her brain could compute what was happening. She had her phone in one hand, her infamous HOA clipboard in the other, and a wedding emergency frown carved deep into her foundation. When she saw the boat parked behind the Limo, her entire posture froze like someone had paused her mid-scream. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again before she managed to bark out, "You need to move that thing now." I didn't even flinch. I sat in my chair on the porch sipping lemonade, legs crossed, enjoying the view like it was live entertainment. I made sure to pause before responding, just long enough to let the silence sting. "You mean my boat, on my driveway?" I asked, feigning innocence so hard it was practically sarcasm. "Yeah, I just thought I'd do something with all this space. You said I don't use it." She was fuming. "The Limo needs to leave after the ceremony. My daughter has a hair appointment at the salon, and then they have photos at the lake. You've boxed them in." I tilted my head and looked at the massive hunk of fiberglass and trailer metal behind the Limo. "Huh? You're right. Looks tight in there. Maybe they shouldn't have parked in a stranger's driveway, huh?" "You're being impossible." "No, Karen," I said calmly. "I'm being neighborly. I'm giving you a valuable lesson in boundaries and physics." Karen's lip quivered like she wanted to yell, but realized shouting would draw more attention from the arriving guests. Instead, she took a deep breath and tried to reason. "Look, let's not ruin the day. Just move the boat and we'll be gone before sunset. No harm done." I leaned forward and whispered with a grin, "There was already harm done the moment you thought my property was your convenience store parking lot." She turned on her heel and stomped back toward the gathering crowd of flower girls, groomsmen, and confused guests who were slowly realizing something was very wrong. I heard her on the phone a few seconds later, voice rising with every sentence, clearly calling in backup. Part of me expected her to summon the HOA goon squad or her cousin with a tow truck, but what actually arrived was even better. A police cruiser pulled into the neighborhood about 20 minutes later. It wasn't sirens blaring dramatic, just slow and steady, pulling into the cul-de-sac with the kind of caution cops use when they've been called to civil disturbances involving entitled people. Karen's eyes lit up like she'd summoned the gods. She practically ran to the cop, pointing at me like I had committed war crimes with a fishing boat. The officer stepped out, calm and professional, and walked up to me first. "Good afternoon, sir. We got a call about a parking dispute." "Dispute's a strong word," I said, handing him a cold water bottle I had ready just for this moment. "Karen here had a Limo park in my driveway without permission, so I parked my boat behind it. On my driveway. Now she's mad the Limo can't leave." The officer nodded slowly and looked at the scene. "So the Limo isn't yours, and the boat is?" "Correct. And I own this property. Got the title in the house if you need it." Karen jumped in like her voice couldn't be left out for more than 10 seconds. "He's being difficult on purpose. This is a wedding. He's sabotaging it. Just make him move the stupid boat." The officer looked between us, obviously trying not to laugh. He cleared his throat and asked, "Did you have permission to use this driveway?" "Well, no, but it's just a driveway. It's not like it's inside his house." He raised an eyebrow. "So you parked a vehicle that doesn't belong to you on private property without permission, and now you're upset because the owner used his own property to block it." Karen opened her mouth but had no answer. The officer looked at me and said, "Technically, you're within your rights. It's your property. You didn't damage anything. It's a civil matter at best." Karen's arms flailed. "So you're not going to do anything?" He smiled politely. "Oh, I'm doing something. I'm leaving because there's nothing illegal here. But I'd suggest you figure out a way to get that limo moved after the boat leaves, whenever that may be." Karen was speechless. I almost wished I had popcorn. But just when I thought the show was over, a sleek car pulled up and out came the bride. White dress, hair perfectly curled, makeup flawless. The poor woman stepped out smiling, expecting happy chaos and music. Instead, she found her mother arguing with a police officer, a boat blocking her limo, and wedding guests whispering like they were watching a soap opera live. Karen rushed to her. "Sweetheart, don't worry. It's just a little misunderstanding. Nothing to panic about." But the bride had locked eyes with me. She walked up to me not angrily, but with an expression of exhausted curiosity. "Excuse me, is this your house?" "Yep, and the boat also mine." "Did my mom really park the limo here without asking?" I nodded. I tried to be nice about it. She took a long breath, looked at the limo, then turned slowly toward her mother. "Mom, what did you do?" Karen tried to explain, babbling something about venue logistics and making things smooth and efficient, but the bride had already turned away, grabbing her phone. "We're calling another ride. Move the limo. I'm not dealing with this. I told you to stay out of the planning, and you promised you would." Karen's mouth fell open like someone had yanked out her batteries. Meanwhile, I could hear several guests behind me muttering things like "about time," and she finally stood up to her. And just when I thought the moment couldn't get better, the limo driver returned from the back seat and said, "Hey, so I've been waiting in this heat for 2 hours. If this car doesn't move in 10 minutes, I'm charging overtime." Karen's face went from flushed to ghost white. I almost felt bad. Almost. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a mile. The best part of this revenge was still sitting quietly in my back pocket, waiting for just the right time to drop. And once I did, Karen's meltdown would go from bad to legendary. The next morning, word had already spread like wildfire across the neighborhood. By sunrise, I had 3 texts and a voicemail from neighbors who just happened to be walking by and wanted to say how much they admired my creative use of personal property. A couple of them even offered to bring lawn chairs for a front row view if the standoff continued. I told them not to worry. It was far from over. Because while the bride had called for another ride and escaped the disaster her mother created, the limo, oh, it was still parked there. And Karen, she wasn't done either. Her fury had evolved overnight into full-blown entitlement mode. And this time, she was dragging backup. At around 9:45 in the morning, a small convoy arrived. First came Karen's minivan, loaded with wedding decorations and what looked like a few angry relatives. Then came the HOA president himself, good old Walter, clipboard clutched in his trembling hand like it was a weapon. And then, in a final touch of drama, an unmarked tow truck crept around the corner, its driver looking confused but ready for chaos. I was already sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, watching it all unfold like a perfectly rehearsed play. Karen stepped out first, looked directly at me, and marched across the lawn as if she owned every square inch of it. "Okay," she barked. "This has gone on long enough. We've given you your little show, but now it's time to grow up and move that stupid boat." "Morning, Karen," I replied, waving casually. "Nice day for a parking dispute, huh?" She didn't smile. "The wedding is over. The guests are gone. The photographer couldn't even get all the pictures because of this circus you created. Just move the boat so we can get the limo out, and we'll pretend this whole thing never happened." I raised an eyebrow. "Pretend? Oh no, Karen. I'm not letting this little memory disappear. I might frame a photo of this boat limo sandwich and hang it in my living room." That's when Walter shuffled over, clearing his throat. "Sir, as president of the HOA, I'm here to inform you that you're in violation of community harmony guidelines. We request you to remove the obstruction so that the vehicle may exit peacefully." I sat down my coffee, stood up, and walked down to meet him. Community harmony guidelines? Is that what we're calling trespassing now? Because I've got video footage, timestamps, and 3 witness statements saying Karen authorized that Limo to park in my driveway without asking. Walter blinked like I'd slapped him. Be reasonable. This is a misunderstanding. No, I said, voice sharp. This is entitlement. And if you want to get the law involved, go ahead. But until that Limo owner comes to me personally, apologizes, and signs a liability waiver, that boat's not moving. Karen exploded. You're humiliating me. That's funny, I said, turning toward her, because I thought you did that all by yourself. She stormed off in a huff, grabbing her phone to make another call. The tow truck driver, still waiting at the end of the driveway, got out and came up to me. So am I towing the boat or the limo? Neither, I replied, unless you want to get sued. This is private property. That limo's not mine. That boat is. You tow anything, you'll be writing me a check. He nodded, then walked back to his truck, clearly deciding this circus wasn't worth the peanuts he was being paid. With no legal leverage and no one willing to break the law for her, Karen shifted tactics. She sent a relative over, a guy in his 50s with slicked back hair and a gold chain who introduced himself as Leo. Leo tried the friendly route. Look, pal, I get it. You're upset. But can't we just call this even and move on? My niece's wedding got ruined. Her mom's freaking out. And I've been up all night listening to everyone blame everyone else. Remove the limo. We forget it ever happened. I gave him credit for trying. He actually sounded sincere. But I wasn't budging. Tell you what, Leo, I'll move the boat in 2 hours. But before I do, I'm going to post the whole story online with pictures. I've got videos too. I think people should know what happens when someone thinks they're above asking for permission. Leo paled. You're going to embarrass the whole family. No, I said. Karen already did that. I'm just putting the spotlight where it belongs. At that point, Karen returned, looking smug again. Fine, she snapped. I just spoke to legal. They said you're creating a hostile environment, and your limo created an illegal one, I replied. So we're even, except I'm not pressing charges. Yet, Karen's face twisted. What will it take to make you drop this? I smiled. An apology. One video. Posted to the neighborhood group chat. Karen looked like she was about to combust. No, absolutely not. Then the boat stays, and if it's still here tomorrow, I'm turning it into a barbecue pit. Might even host a driveway fish fry. You're invited. There was silence. Everyone stared at her. Even Walter looked like he wanted to disappear into the shrubs. Eventually, Karen caved. Sort of. She didn't film an apology, but the bride showed up again, apologized directly to me, and convinced her mother to sign a handwritten note admitting she had unknowingly used private property without the owner's consent. I took a photo of the note, shook the bride's hand, and finally moved the boat. As the limo sputtered to life and pulled away, Karen sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight you'd think it was bolted shut. But as far as I was concerned, the fight wasn't over yet, because this wasn't just about a limo or wedding. It was about a pattern. And Karen was about to find out that her reign over the neighborhood wasn't as secure as she thought. Not when the whole block had just witnessed her fall. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence you feel when a storm has passed, but the clouds still hang low, threatening more rain. Karen didn't show her face on the street. The limo was gone. The wedding disaster seemed to have faded, but the energy in the neighborhood had shifted. It wasn't over. Everyone knew it. She wasn't the type to take a loss without plotting some kind of retaliation. I just didn't expect her to drag the entire HOA into it, like some twisted encore. It started with a letter slipped under my door. No envelope, just a single printed sheet on official HOA letterhead that reeked of Karen's perfume. It accused me of aggressive obstruction of communal peace, inappropriate storage of marine equipment, and deliberate disruption of neighborhood events. There were no fines attached, just a stern warning that my property would be under review at the next board meeting. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Karen was coming for revenge, and she wasn't going to do it with noise this time. She was playing the long game, the HOA rule book her new weapon. I could have ignored it, but ignoring people like Karen is how they crawl back into power. So instead, I started gathering ammunition. I pulled out the HOA bylaws, found every contradiction and loophole she'd ever abused, and highlighted them with glee. I compiled a file of every complaint I'd received from her over the years, some so ridiculous they'd make you laugh, like the time she reported my garden hose for being too green, or the time she claimed my wind chimes were conducting noise aggression. Then I reached out to my neighbors. Turns out they had their own stories. One had been fined for hanging a kid's drawing in their window. Another got written up for having a whimsical mailbox. Karen's fingerprints were everywhere. The day of the HOA meeting, I walked in with a binder, 3 statements from other homeowners, and a printed screenshot of Karen's Limo parked at my driveway. Timestamped, high resolution, impossible to dispute. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and it felt more like a courtroom than a neighborly gathering. Karen was already there, seated at the front, lips pursed in her signature scowl. She didn't look at me as I walked past. She didn't have to. The tension was electric. The HOA president, Walter, opened the meeting with his usual mumbling and tried to steer things gently. But before he could even read the first agenda item, Karen interrupted. I'd like to bring forward a motion to formally censure Mr. Blake for his reckless behavior and deliberate hostility during a neighborhood event. The room went quiet. Every eye turned to me. I stood slowly and opened my binder. Actually, I'd like to respond to that. But first, I'd like to enter evidence into the record. Walter blinked. This isn't a court. Then maybe someone should tell Karen to stop acting like she's Judge Judy. That earned a couple of snorts and chuckles from the back of the room. I passed around the screenshots, then the printed messages, then the testimonies. I explained everything in brutal, calm detail. How Karen used HOA rules like a personal sledgehammer. How she repeatedly abused her authority. How she knowingly had a Limo trespass on private property during a major event, and then attempted to bully her way out of consequences. The kicker? I ended with the video footage, a short clip of Karen saying, "It's just a driveway, no big deal," while waving her arms like she was performing magic. When I sat back down, the silence wasn't awkward. It was loaded. Karen's eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, but none of them made eye contact. One of the board members, a quiet woman named Melody who rarely spoke, finally cleared her throat. Maybe it's time we reevaluate our leadership. This isn't the first time we've had issues. Karen snapped. You're all turning on me because of one incident. That man boxed in a limo with a boat. Who does that? Another neighbor, Paul from down the street, spoke up. Someone protecting his property from a neighbor who acts like the queen of the cul-de-sac. And let's be honest, it wasn't just one incident, Karen. We've all dealt with you. Karen stood, red-faced and trembling, and tried to rally support. You think I'm the villain here. I was trying to make my daughter's wedding perfect. I've dedicated years to keeping this neighborhood clean and orderly, and this is how I'm repaid. Walter looked tired, older than usual. He took off his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Karen, you've done a lot for this HOA, but maybe it's time someone else took over. There's too much division, too many complaints. Her chair scraped loudly as she stood and walked out. She didn't say another word, just left. The air shifted as the door closed behind her, like a pressure had been lifted. The board voted to suspend Karen's position pending a formal review, and in the meantime, they appointed Melody as acting head. There was no cheering, no grand celebration, just quiet relief. But the damage was done. Karen's grip on the neighborhood had cracked, and everyone knew it. That night, a few neighbors came over for an impromptu driveway barbecue. We laughed, shared stories, and someone even brought a cake shaped like a boat. At one point, someone asked if I'd move the boat back into the garage now that the war was over. I thought about it for a second and said, not yet. Let's give it one more day, just in case she tries something again. We all laughed, but deep down, I wasn't joking. Because with Karen, you never really knew when the next stunt would hit. But this time, at least I was ready. A full week passed before anyone saw Karen again. The silence had been blissful, like the neighborhood itself was breathing easier without her constant clipboard patrols and unsolicited complaints. People walked their dogs without fear of being cited for leash length. Kids played basketball in driveways without someone yelling about property value. Even Walter seemed lighter, like he'd aged in reverse since stepping back from Karen's influence. But everyone knew it was temporary. Karen wasn't the kind to fade into obscurity, and true to her nature, she came back with a bang, or more accurately, with flyers. They showed up early Saturday morning. Every mailbox, every front door, every community bulletin board had one, a glossy, two-sided handout titled "The Truth Behind the Boat Bully." I nearly choked on my cereal when I saw the one taped to my own mailbox. It featured a badly photoshopped picture of me next to my boat with devil horns and a fake HOA violation notice stapled across the corner. The backside was a full-blown manifesto about how I publicly humiliated a grieving mother, obstructed emergency vehicle access, and threatened neighborhood peace with malicious nautical equipment. Malicious nautical equipment. I read that part 3 times just to let it soak in. I wasn't even angry. I laughed so hard I had to sit down on the porch. But I knew this wasn't about making neighbors believe her. This was about saving face. Karen couldn't stand the fact that she lost control, so now she was trying to rewrite the story, paint herself as the misunderstood victim and me as some boat-wielding villain. Unfortunately for her, the neighborhood wasn't buying it. In fact, within hours, people were sharing pictures of the flyers on the community group chat with captions like "New HOA fiction section dropped," and Karen's creative writing skills finally put to use. Still, I figured she wouldn't stop until I gave her a final reminder that her games had consequences. So I went into the garage and pulled out something I hadn't used in years, a set of large vinyl banners from what I used to run a charter business. I dragged out the boat, hitched it up, and spent the afternoon giving it a fresh wash. Then I carefully hung the banner across both sides. It read, "Private driveway, private property, private boat, not Karen's wedding venue." Underneath it, in smaller letters, I added, "Next time, try asking." The next morning, I parked it at the exact same spot behind my driveway gate. Perfectly legal, perfectly visible, and I left it there all day, like an art installation. Cars slowed down just to get a look. One guy on a bike actually rode up my drive to take a selfie next to it. People honked in support. Someone dropped off a plate of cookies with a note that read, "Captain of Justice." I should have made merch, but what truly made it all worth it happened the following evening. I was outside grilling burgers when Karen finally walked by again, this time without her usual army of HOA board members or clipboard. Just her, walking stiffly, sunglasses hiding most of her face, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. She slowed when she saw the boat. Then she stopped entirely, just standing there in the middle of the street, staring at the banner like it had personally insulted her ancestors. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The look on her face was enough. For once, she was the one who felt small, exposed, and publicly ridiculed. And not because someone humiliated her, because she did it to herself. She eventually turned and walked off without a word, but the message had landed loud and clear. The HOA never reinstated her. Melody officially took over as president, and under her, the tone of the entire neighborhood shifted. Rules were still followed, but now they were enforced with reason, not dictatorship. People actually wanted to attend HOA meetings. Decisions were made by vote instead of decree. And Karen, she kept her distance. She still lived here. Of course, moved entitlement doesn't vanish overnight, but she became a background figure. No more shouting matches. No more secret flyers. No more wedding limos in other people's driveways. I eventually moved the boat back into the garage, but only after the banner had done its job. It was a quiet, satisfying end to a noisy saga. And the funny part, all of it could have been avoided with a simple knock on the door. A little courtesy. A little respect. But Karen didn't operate that way. She played games. And for once she lost. Weeks later, I saw the bride again. She was walking her dog, smiling like someone who had finally escaped the shadow of her mother's drama. She waved at me across the street and said, "Still got the boat." I grinned. Always. She laughed. "Thanks for not letting her bulldoze you." You have no idea how many people wanted to but never had the guts. That hit differently, because this wasn't just about a boat or a driveway or a ruined wedding. It was about setting a boundary, reminding people that private means private, that even in the most absurd of battles, sometimes the pettiest weapon, like a well-placed fishing boat, delivers the clearest message. And if Karen ever forgets that again, well, Last Resort is still parked in my garage, ready to go.